It's April 1865. Lee's army is on the move. It is trying to break free from the Union Army, which is in hot pursuit. The breakthrough happened just a few days prior, and things are getting a little bit haywire for that army, and Lee knows that it's only a matter of time that he's going to be tracked down and trapped if he's not able to resupply his army and get them out of here and possibly over to Kentucky or North Carolina. He's trying his best to move them as fast as he can, but he gets caught in Appomattox. Now that we've arrived here at Clifton, I'll walk through what this property was like, and I'll talk a little bit about the information that's on the sign out here, and we will go over some of that information, including a headache that Grant had just before he gets to Appomattox. He ends up spending the night here at a house called Clifton, which is, I mean, he's done that probably many places, but that evening was a pretty rough evening for him as he was suffering from a migraine. We'll talk about that here, and I'll show you the property behind me. I can't really go on to it because it's private property, but I can definitely pan back and forth and show you what's here and the road heading in that direction, which is where we're going because we're headed up to a place called New Store. That is another stop on the Lee's retreat, and at that location, that is where Robert E. Lee relieves Pickett of his command. Somewhere out in this location was a place called Clifton. It was a home. It was home to Joseph Crute and his family. And early on April 8th of 1865, General Grant ends up staying right out here where that home was. And he ends up spending the night out here. Unfortunately for him, he's got a massive migraine going on, which he suffers from constantly. and he called it his sick that he suffered from. He spent the night with General John A. Rawlins, sleeping in the same bed together, and resting his feet in water and mustard, and putting mustard on his wrists to try to cure himself of the headache. The very next day, when the treatments failed, early on April 9th, Grant and his headache took to the road toward Appomattox Courthouse, a few miles east of the courthouse, and an officer arrived with a message from Lee, who agreed to meet Grant to discuss surrender terms. He said, "The instant I saw the contents of that note, I was cured." And he took this road and headed in that direction on the way to Appomattox. Now, unfortunately, the sign that's out here for the Civil War trails is pretty bad roached. It's brown on all corners. It's looking pretty bad. And out of respect to the good work that they do, I'm not going to show this sign, but we'll talk about what the sign details here, and then we'll shove off from here and we'll head over to where Lee's rear guard was with Longstreet towards Appomattox. So off in this distance here, it's called, this stop's called New Store, and kind of off in the distance there on the left-hand side of where I'm standing, there used to be a stop for the stage road from Richmond to Lynchburg. In 1865, it consisted of Lewis D. Jones's house, 3 offices, a cobbler shop, and a store. On April 8th, virtually the entire Army of Northern Virginia marched past here, followed by 2 corps of Union Army of the Potomac. Union General Andrew A. Humphreys halted his corps just to the west. Union General Nelson A. Miles spent the night here in the Jones house called Keswick. Now, out on the sign, they have a detailed map of where everything is, and it kind of shows where the store would have been and where all of these different little offices are. But today, all you see is a wooded lot from the road that we just took to get here. Somewhere near here, Robert E. Lee writes his orders to relieve Johnson, Pickett, and Anderson of their duties, to send them back home and to relieve them of command, essentially. They did not perform well at Sailor's Creek, the location that we were at not too far from here. But it looks like maybe Pickett and Johnson didn't get those orders, because at Appomattox, they end up surrendering with the Army there at Appomattox. So it's pretty amazing to stand in a spot like this, knowing the type of history that took place here. And just as the entire Army of Northern Virginia, what was left of it, was pushing down this road directly behind me towards Appomattox, the Union Army would shortly follow. It's an amazing stop. It's too bad that some of the historic buildings are no longer here, though. Well, pretty much all of them, actually. So somewhere out here is where the rear guard was, where General James Longstreet's corps entrenched early in the morning of April 9th, 1865 to protect the rear of the Army of Northern Virginia. Robert E. Lee and most of his army was bivouacked about 4 miles south, just short of Appomattox Courthouse. Now, they say somewhere out here you can actually see the earthworks, or the remnants of some of the earthworks where those soldiers were entrenched, if you're looking due south. I'm looking in that direction now, and I'm not seeing anything out there in those woods. I don't know if maybe they've just kind of disappeared over time. I'm pretty sure I'm headed in the right area. It should be out in this area here somewhere, but they're not there. And I've looked across the street and, you know, kind of used this map that's on here to get my bearings as well, and I'm not seeing any of the entrenchments that they hastily put up out here at all. This is an interesting stop, though. So here at this location where I'm at right now, the Army of Northern Virginia rear guard is entrenched behind me, stretching across the street and off in that direction there, trying to protect the rear of the Army of Northern Virginia. De Trobriand's men are coming up from the road that's just over there, and across the street in front of me is where the New Hope Church is. So here in a minute, we're going to take off from here, and we're going to go down the street about 4-ish miles. And we're going to go to a pull-off for the National Park area where Lee would have had his last headquarters, and we're going to check that place out and see what remains out there. Now we're out at the location where Lee's last camp was, which is directly behind this camera. Out front here, in this very loud trafficked area, is where a home used to be. Now this home became a field hospital out here on April 8th and 9th of 1865. And there was a sketch that was produced by Henry Orth. Connor's home served as a field hospital for the Army of Northern Virginia during that time. Both Allen Connor and his brother Jennings joined the Confederate Army, and Allen served as a private in Company H of the 2nd Virginia Cavalry, and Jennings in Company B of the 46th Virginia Infantry. The two brothers married two sisters, Elizabeth and Missouri, of the musical Sweeney family. It's believed that the banjo player Joel Sweeney died at his brother-in-law's home, which would have been right across the street here in those fields. It's pretty amazing to think of the different types of history that's out here, but also this is the last field, no pun intended, of misery for some of these soldiers that are out here, especially the ones that were wounded in this last battle. We're going to push on down the road, and we're going to talk about the location where the passing of the armies happened when Joshua Chamberlain saluted John B. Gordon. we're coming near the end here of our journey, and I'm at a location right now. This big beautiful field behind me, but I'm headed to a wooded lot right now where Robert E. Lee basically spent his last couple of nights in command of the Army of Northern Virginia. He was out here for that last council of war, and for that last few moments where he was considering whether or not to surrender his army and what his options were. So we'll walk up that way and I'll let you see what there is to see out there. So here we are. We are at the last location where General Lee headquartered, right here in this thicket of woods on a hillside outside of Appomattox Courthouse, which is just off in that direction over there. There's a trail that takes you up through the woods from a parking lot area down through there. And there's a nice, what looks like metallic sign painted over in blue and gray. And it says, on this spot were established the headquarters of the Army of Northern Virginia, General Robert E. Lee, CSA, commanding from April 8th to April 11th, 1865. This would have been the place that he made that last headquarters, where he stood outside of his tent passing orders off to his officers to tell them to go back up over the hill and surrender his army for him. When he came back, he addressed his army and he bid them farewell with a letter to be read out loud, went back into his tent, and he didn't come back out for a little while. His army marched off in that direction, right up over the hill. They stacked their arms like you would see at any reenactment, and they placed their battle flags rolled up on top of those arms. And after a while, there were so many arms to be stacked that it took too long, and they just piled them in a pile off the side of the road. And while they were there, the printing presses were inside of a small building, and they were hot with ink as they were printing off parole papers for the soldiers who had surrendered here, so that they could make their way back home without being harassed by other soldiers. And they had to take the oath of allegiance back to the United States. So this was the climactic point of Appomattox. General Lee had to sit out in these woods and make that decision. Today, it's just a quiet, peaceful place where you can walk around and take it all in. And we're going to push off from here, and we're going to head down the hill. There's a place where a field hospital once was. It was across the street, and it's connected to a man who popularized the new or current banjo from an instrument that African Americans had brought over with them. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. See what we got in store for us leading up the road to Appomattox. Well, it's early morning out here near Appomattox at the old cabin that we rented out for the evening. And we're about to head out to the battlefield and go check it out here for the 160th anniversary video that we're putting together. I'm gonna make my way over there and try to cover some of the important stops that are along the way. Again, I have another video that covers the battle and surrender in its entirety, and I'll also put the link to that in the description of this video so that you can go and check that out. So if you want more information about the battle itself. This is kind of a travel video taking you to all the different places for the 160th anniversary. So we're on our way. So off in this direction out in here, right by the road, that's where that Robertson house, Elizabeth Robertson, would have been. And out here on April 9th, 1865, or around that house that was built in 1842, some of the last casualties of the war here in Virginia took place at this last real clash of cavalry at Appomattox. Confederate General Thomas L. Rosser and Thomas Mumford's cavalry division, about 2,400 men, escaped the Federal noose and was closing around them near this location. Riding 2 miles west, they trotted onto the Richmond-Lynchburg stage road, a short distance to the right over here. It's right down in this location, off in that distance area over there. Federal cavalry had observed them and charged at them at about 11 a.m. It was General Henry E. Davies' brigade of 1st New Jerseyans, 10th New York, and 5th Pennsylvania. And they briefly drove the 1st and 2nd Virginia Cavalry west, but were soon repulsed. Union Colonel Sammy Young's brigade of 4th, 8th, 16th, and 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry launched a second charge, but the 1st Maryland Cavalry and the rest of Colonel William Woodridge's brigade with 500 men of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Virginia Cavalry pushed the Federals to the Robertson house, somewhere in this location. Some of the troopers fired from the windows, forcing back the Confederates as Union General McKenzie arrived with reinforcements. At about noon, before another Federal attack could be made, news came that Lee and General Grant had declared a truce to discuss Lee's surrender. This is one of the last clashes of cavalry out here, and if you think back to all of the different cavalry battles that happened in Virginia, it's kind of crazy that it all ended right out here. Now you can't really tell, but on the other side here there's an interstate. You could probably tell by the noise. And then of course this road rides down and around up to that road that we were talking about earlier, and just on the other side here is a Walmart. So this battlefield is all but lost over here, except for a couple of signs from the Civil War trails. Captain Beekman, Robert Cantz, and Lieutenant Richard Darntz, wounded in the head, was amongst the regiment's 7 casualties. With the 10th New York Cavalry Lieutenant Norman Reynolds, who was wounded in the right arm and thumb. Captain John Van Tuyl was captured during the charge but escaped en route to Lynchburg, and Sergeant James L. Carey received the Medal of Honor for daring bravery and urging the men forward in a charge. Private Charles Mullett attempted to take a Confederate battle flag but was captured himself and taken to Lynchburg after being released. Mullett raised the first United States flag over the city when the surrender on April 12th in 1865 happened. Confederate Captain William J. Raisin, 1st Maryland Cavalry, seeing the Confederate lines push back, and told Colonel George W. Dorsey, "We must charge them. It is our only chance." Dorsey responded with, "Draw saber, gallop, charge!" After the Federals in turn drove back the Maryland Cavalry, Private Herman Heimler rallied the troops to the side of Private John Ridgely, the color bearer. Private William Price was mortally wounded. Private James T. Godwin, Company H, 2nd Virginia Cavalry, and Private James Bailey were wounded, while Sergeant Robert W. Parker was killed. Either Price or Parker rests in a grave marked unknown in the Confederate cemetery at Appomattox Courthouse, National Historic Park. All of this happened right out here. With great fields like these, great things come with them. And we talked about those Medal of Honor recipients out here and those last few men that perished on battlefields in Virginia. It's amazing. And people wonder about the history of preservation. They wonder about these Civil War battlefields and whether or not they're still going to be here. When you stand in a place where a Medal of Honor recipient committed the act that gave them the Medal of Honor, and you see this place looking like this by an interstate, trash all in it. It's a small patch of ground. It's the only thing that's left of it. And I'm pretty sure it's not owned by the park, by the trust, by the Civil War Trails organization. It's just a piece of land that still exists where a house once stood. Most likely inside these trees here. It's absolute insanity to think that such an important piece of land is swallowed up by such things. But progress has to happen. You have to have these interstates for cars to travel. It just amazes me that this story hasn't been captured better than this. I mean, look behind me here. That right there likely is where the house was. The battlefield stretches out from this direction here and comes back towards me. Off in the distance over here is a portion of the battlefield. Appomattox Courthouse, you go here and then back down this direction, and that's where you go to the actual national battlefield where the surrender took place. And that is preserved beautifully. I don't know. Even this wayside marker here, there's something special about it. Well, now that we're wrapped up over here, we're going to head off to another marker where another clash happened just before all of this took place. And we're going to head down the road here, check it out and see what they got over there with the next Civil War Trail sign. Made our way over to the train depot here in Appomattox. This is the downtown area, and this is where one of the Civil War Trail sign is posted. And out at this location, this is where Union Cavalry encountered some of the supply wagons for Robert E. Lee that was heading into the location where his army was at. The Union Cavalry captured them, along with a bunch of cannons, artillery, and all kinds of stuff. So at this location, there really wasn't too much of a fight that was put up when the supply trains were caught and pretty much taken by the Union soldiers. I mean, the end was coming near. It was very visible. This is another amazing spot that you can go to. And then when the hours are a little bit busier and it's not a Sunday morning like it is right now, people are walking around and taking in the sights, just like I am right now. If you want to come out here and be alone at the place, Sunday's a pretty good day. So in downtown Appomattox, there really isn't much to see. The visitor center here is that train depot that I just pointed out to you. This location is called the Battle of Appomattox Station. The station, I'm not exactly sure 100% where it is, but it was probably somewhere near here. And according to the sign, it does say it's near here. But if you come out to this area, you're going to see some curious things, including a small downtown area where most of the stores are completely shuttered or closed. Very interesting. So once Custer captures the supply trains, and then he captures the supply wagons that are not too far from here, Lee knew that the end was coming near. And he had already talked to General Grant about possibly meeting for terms of surrender. Custer really put the nail in the coffin out here at this train station. Right across the street from me is a very old building. It was put here after the American Civil War ended, but it stood right beside where the old train depot was. And I will turn the camera around here so you can see what I'm talking about in just a second. So that this building right here, with all of the literature, if you will, on the outside, the train depot, the original train depot, the footprints are right there. Where this used to be a bank. The white building there used to be a bank back in the 1800s. And then the train depot, the original train depot, was sitting in this location. And of course the train ran up and down the tracks, or the location where it's at right now, closely to it. But this is a modern building that is now placed in on top of the footprints of the old train depot here at Appomattox. Headed up the street now because I saw some monuments around the corner at a building that's being worked on. It looks like a pretty old building over there. So I want to check out what that's all about. It's not too far from here, maybe a quarter mile or so. Decent city stroll, if you will. We'll see what we can find. Really neat history around here, pretty much around every turn. That little monument behind me there is a memorial to a member of Congress that was in the area, a person that was born in 1908. I believe the last name was Abbott. We're gonna make our way around the corner here and go up to that what looks like a courthouse, and see what monument is over there. Always gotta watch out for the traffic, even on Sunday morning. Wow, what a beautiful building. Wow, it's pretty amazing. I'm gonna flip this camera around so you can see what I'm talking about here in a second. It looks like some sort of restoration's going on over here. It's pretty neat. New and old Appomattox Courthouse. Well, here it is. We made it to the courthouse. And of course, this isn't the location where the surrender and all that took place. It's a building that was erected in 1892. It's pretty neat. Now the monument that sits behind me here, just over my shoulder, has a memorial to the Confederate dead, specifically the units that fought from Appomattox that were with the Army of Northern Virginia. The monument itself has a placard that sits, or a smaller monument behind it that details that information as to which units they're talking about. And the monument with the soldier sitting on top represents all the Confederate dead that had passed away during the Civil War. Now, I normally cover just American Civil War history, but I love old signage. And behind me here is a building with some pretty neat signage. J.E. Sears and Company, out here at Appomattox. it looks like our good friends with the Civil War Trails has been doing some work out here in Appomattox. The last time I visited this location, there were some signs out here that were pretty roached. They were pretty bad off. Now, thanks to American Battlefield Trust and the Civil War Trails, it looks like the signs have been replaced. And inside of looks like a display case or some sort, some of those signs are inside this display case, including this bad boy right here. Now that's the one I remember. It's got that nice crack across the top and that roaching, that brownness from the sun scorching it all the years it's sat out here. And I'm sure the information needed to be updated as well. But I'm about to head out here to this location and see the signs that are over here. Roughly where, if I'm not mistaken, this is where the supply wagons were captured, out in this area here. So let's go take a look at it. Well, it looks like I was correct. Appomattox Campaign Civil War Trail sign is out here now. The Battle of Appomattox Station sign is out here. And then there is a Battle of Appomattox Station Medal of Honor trails from the American Battlefield Trust. Right here. Now they have a QR code on here for you to scan and to check to see the trail of the Medal of Honor and the Valor and all that stuff up and down throughout this area, because there's several signs located out in Virginia, and one of those signs was at the Ream Station we just talked about in a previous video about Ream Station, and I will also put a link to that video in the description of this video so that you can not only learn more about Ream Station, but so that you can see one of the stories from these trails here. And we'll talk here in a minute about the Medal of Honor recipients here that the American Battlefield Trust has highlighted at Appomattox. So this particular sign out here talks about 4 Union soldiers that received the Medal of Honor fighting here at Appomattox. Their Medal of Honors were given to them for capturing the enemy's flag. Now, the flag of any unit during the American Civil War was a symbol of pride, and it was also a rallying point for the troops in those units. Where that flag stood is where the forward deployed line of that unit was supposed to be. So if your flag is stationed here and you're looking up and down the field to try to figure out where you need to be, you rally off that flag. And I know a lot of people like to discredit the members of service that get the Medal of Honor for capturing a flag, and they think that that is such an easy thing to do, that you just simply pick up a flag and bring it back home with you. These men are in line with each other, shoulder to shoulder. They are firing 50 caliber bullets at each other, and to charge into the face of the enemy and rip their flag out of their hands when the man who's holding that flag generally is protecting it with his life, because he does not want to go back to his unit without his flag. He's probably going to try to kill you before he lets you take that flag. So for a man to run up to the unit, snatch the flag out of the hand at the peril of his own life, and basically create disorganization within a unit who is trying to figure out where the rallying point is, that is valor in the face of the enemy. So these men that they talk about here is First Lieutenant Morton Reed, 8th New York Cavalry, Corporal Thomas Anderson, and Chief Bugler Charles Shorn of the 1st West Virginia Cavalry, and Private Bernard Shields, 2nd West Virginia Cavalry. They were all from different units, but they were awarded for the same thing, capturing the enemy's flag. Now, out here at Appomattox, it was the last little bit of fighting that these guys were going to be doing as far as the Confederate soldiers are concerned. And they didn't know whether or not they were going to be shipped off to a prison camp, or if they were going to be allowed to go home, or even be hung for treason. They had no idea. So these guys were fighting with every inch of their life out here in these fields. For these men to take those flags, it's a pretty brave thing. Now there is a QR code that's on this sign that you can check out for yourself. I'll turn around here so you can see. And maybe I can get this down here. QR code is right there. You can scan that QR code and you can take a look at the trail of signs that are available for you to go to. I highly suggest that you use your fingernail, scrape on that QR code. Make sure that that code is not a sticker that's placed over top of this code. There are criminals that are placing sticker QR codes over top of legitimate QR codes, and they are stealing your information. So do that check first, then scan the code. Some pretty interesting information that you're going to get from this.
Edward Parsons Toby Jr. exemplified extraordinary courage and selflessness during the Civil War, particularly at Sailor's Creek on April 6th and at Farmville on April 7th. Despite suffering severe wounds in both battles, he refused to seek medical attention, remaining steadfast with his regiment. When the regiment's adjutant was wounded, Toby took on the full responsibilities of the adjutant, ensuring the unit's operations continued smoothly. His dedication was unwavering, as he remained on duty despite his injuries, embodying the highest standards of bravery and duty. Toby's determination was evident as he was present at the final surrender at Appomattox, symbolizing his unwavering commitment to his comrades and country until the very end of the conflict.
Where I'm currently standing is where General R. Lindsay Walker's artillery position was. And if you can imagine an imaginary kind of horseshoe out in this area, that is where the artillery is positioned. This is the place where George Custer attacked on April 8th of 1865. And he also attacked the Southside Railroad over here, or the Appomattox Railroad over in that location there. 1 mile to the south stood the Appomattox Station that we just pointed in that direction, and depot on the Southside Railroad, and a vital rail link for the Confederacy running between Petersburg and Lynchburg. Retreating westward after the fall of Richmond, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia raced to this point. Custer's cavalry rode hard, reaching Appomattox Station first. Then unexpected Union attack prompted Walker's Confederate artillery crews to quickly secure muskets and fire in the direction of the train station while scrambling to get their guns into action. After several failed assaults, Custer's brigade finally overran the Confederate position. The Federals captured more than 24 cannons, 150 to 200 wagons, and about 1,000 prisoners. The bulk of the Confederate artillery withdrew north to Oakville, and some 20 cannon made it to Lynchburg. Early the next morning, Lee launched one more effort to open the road to the west. This artillery position here, once that station was captured, and Custer rides out to here and captures these cannons and the supplies that are over here, this is the thing that gave the indication to Robert E. Lee that his army was done. Now Lee's not quit by any measure, but he's a general. He's an expert at the, if you will, at the science of war, or the practice of war, and he knows when the end's drawing near. He knows when things are not looking good for him and his army. So, with him realizing that his supplies are dwindling and that the wagons are captured over here and a big portion of his artillery is gone, he's sitting off in that direction over there, over at Appomattox, where the courthouse is, and he's thinking to himself, what am I going to do? So that's when he plans to punch through the Union lines. It's one last ditch effort. If he can break through those lines and head off and get away from this, then maybe he can secure enough free road in front of him to be able to make it to the next location, just like he's been doing this entire time leading up to Appomattox. But that's not going to be something that's going to happen. The next morning when he launches that attack, things seem to be working. They seem to be doing what they're supposed to do. Gordon is doing his job. And that initial wave of success gives them hope. But then they realize the walls are closing in. And that's going to be the end of the Army of Northern Virginia here at Appomattox. We'll take you over there here in a second. We're going to walk our way through some of the positions over there. Just a real quick, brief thing. And like I said, I'm going to put a link to my video that takes you more in depth to some of the places at Appomattox here for this 160th anniversary of the surrender at Appomattox. Now, in talking about that fight at the Battle of Appomattox Station, earlier we were talking about Private Bernard Shields of the 2nd West Virginia Cavalry and him receiving his Medal of Honor. But what we didn't talk about was we didn't talk about the man that he snatched that flag from, likely. And it was Private William Davis of the 2nd Company of the Washington Artillery of New Orleans. Now, during that melee, during that fight, he was injured pretty badly. He was described as a splendid soldier. And most of the men that carried the flag for their units were typically called that. They were highly praised by their unit commanders. They were highly praised by fellow soldiers for the most part. And the reason why is because they were the most trusted members of their unit and considered extremely brave for carrying their flag. Private Bernard Shields, on the other hand, ends up receiving his Medal of Honor for doing that. And it's out on fields just like this right here that things like that took place. And it took place on a regular basis. It happened on a regular basis. You know, only a handful of people would ever receive the distinct honor of having a Medal of Honor. And most likely because a lot of the things that are considered to be valor often go unseen because it's in the heat of the moment. When you're fighting a fight, something stands out to you. And in those moments, they're able to see that for themselves. But a lot of times, a lot of things go unnoticed. And some soldiers fight on these fields and do very amazing things and never get recognized for it. So just remember that. Whenever you meet a Medal of Honor recipient, think about all the thousands of other soldiers that fought in their wars and their conflicts and the things that they did on those fields. They should be honored too. Harry Woodbury was a Dartmouth College graduate. He was 27 years old, and he was here for the Battle of Appomattox Station. He would end up describing the fight like this. Custer's division, as usual, went in on a charge. We had a thick piece of wood to get through to reach their artillery. In this woods, we received the most terrible fire of canister that I ever saw. It was getting dark and the woods were constantly lighted up with flashing of their cannon. And then that awful shrieking as the shell and canister came plowing and tearing through the trees. Suddenly, I felt a blow and a numbing sensation across my breast and found myself turning a double somersault off into the bushes. Getting up, I found where I was wounded. My fingers were completely knocked out, hanging over the back of the side of my hand with a little shred of skin. He got lucky. Got hit by a shell fragment, likely, and knocked him completely around because it hit his hand. And think about the force of destruction that that shell has when it's swinging around like that and hitting someone. If that had hit him in the chest, that's it. Game over. Now, walking out into these fields here reminds me of General Custer and his actions while with the Union Army. Now, he's fighting for freedom and democracy and the Constitution and the United States continuing to be the United States. He's fighting to ultimately free other men, which is what the late war premise is for the United States military. It starts off as preserving the Union, and it ends up being the freedom of other men. Now, what he ends up doing, fighting for the United States military, is he ends up fighting against indigenous people later in his career. And if you haven't lived under a rock for the last 40, 50 years, you know how that ends. George Custer meets a very abrupt end. His brother ends up receiving 2 Medal of Honors. And his brother gets one of those Medal of Honors for his actions at the Battle of Sailor's Creek. Again, I have a longer video that talks about Sailor's Creek, and it goes over the actions of his brother at Sailor's Creek. And you can check that out by clicking the link in the description. This is an amazing field. I hope you get out here someday to see it. Now, we often talk about great fields. The field that's directly behind me here is one of those great fields, where one of the great moments in history happened during the American Civil War. General Grant is sitting here by the road at the rise just over my shoulders there. And he writes a scribbled note to send back to Washington, D.C. On that note, he details the fact that Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia has just been basically just surrendered, and that the war here in Northern Virginia is pretty much over. Within hours, it reaches Washington, D.C., and the bells are tolling. With Lee goes the Confederacy, and everybody knows it. Today, it's places like this right here behind me where the South lies. This is where those Confederate soldiers who fought for the South, who fought for the Confederacy, with Robert E. Lee and other generals across these fields, this is where their bodies lie. Their fight, whatever it may be, rests right there with them in those graves. Here at Appomattox, there's a small plot that represents some of those soldiers, and they're there in the graves behind us. And also there is a Union soldier back there too, if I'm not mistaken. The bodies on these fields would get intermingled. They would be buried hastily and then eventually dug back up, and sometimes mistakenly buried in cemetery plots for the Union and for the South. The funny thing is when the war is over, when these men are dead and gone, when these plots are erected and these monuments are brought up, people are still trying to remember something. They're still trying to harken back to an old day of some sort. But the reality is when these men are fighting out here against each other and killing each other, there's only one place they go, and it's in the dirt. And then eventually they are buried alongside each other, or near each other, and sometimes on top of each other. Honestly, to sit here and think about things like war, why people kill each other, I don't know. It's a real big topic. So sometimes these fields out here, they come with side stories, different parts of history in the local area that you don't realize is out here until you get on top of the place. I've been out here a few times before, and every time I come out here, I visit a grave that's out here of a Mr. Sweeney. He is the man that popularized the modern banjo. He was on a minstrel with his brothers touring, and he actually died in 1860. But according to the sign back there on the hill, they said that his brother was actually Jeb Stuart's favorite banjo picker, and he played for him all the way up until 1863-64. So I'm gonna go out here and check this out real quick. right, so after making our way back from Lee's last camp, the position where he was at up on the hill recently, we are now in the spot where the armies would have marched through for that last passing of the army. They would have taken this route on up through here, and you see the hill off in the distance there. They come up, and then they're going to go around the corner there, up into where the Union Army is to receive them. That's where Gordon rears his horse up in that salute. And that's where Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain gives that final salute to the passing of the armies. And it's made popular in the book that he wrote about it. In the fields down below here and on up through the hills where I'm going here in a second, that's where the armies actually camped out, the Confederate soldiers. The Union soldiers back on the other side over here could actually see the soldiers down here preparing their tent sides, their muskets and everything. They could actually see the activity in the fields down below. And if you stand up there on top of that hill, that's where you can see everything. But the soldiers down here had no idea that they were about to surrender for real. And as they were getting prepared for another long, hard day, then they get the word that they're about to fall into ranks and march their way up here. I'm sure the news was pretty hard to take for some of them. So we're here. We made it. I'm on the last ridge line that the Army of Northern Virginia ever defended. Right here, where the North Carolinians stood their ground and fought as hard as they could to try to keep this lane open so that the Confederate Army could make their way and break through right over here, just in front of me. The last casualties for the Army of Northern Virginia on the battlefield happened right here at this location. And right back down here towards that town. That's where the actual surrender takes place back there. That's where Grant goes down to meet Robert E. Lee. That's where Gordon brings his men up for surrender and gets that salute from Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. All of that happened here 160 years ago. And today, we're honoring those people. We are honoring those people that came before us, that served, sacrificed, so that we can be here today, talking about it, and not shooting at each other, really. These anniversaries are pretty special. There's a feeling in the air. I hope you get a chance to come out here and see it for yourself one day. It's absolutely amazing, and this place is breathtaking. It is breathtaking. Now for a little bit of orientation for you. Where I'm standing right now is the actual location where the Confederate line for the last time is up here on this ridge line, fighting off in this direction against the Union soldiers that are coming in. This here likely is also a place that Grant stopped on his horse right about here as he looked down towards the town. And that's the road that he would have taken down into Appomattox. Out here you get a unique perspective of what small town life was like back in the 1800s, especially 1860. These buildings that are around here, they don't represent every building that was here, but it's a good portion of buildings here in Appomattox. And the house itself, where the surrender took place, it's not 100% original. It was actually rebuilt over here from the original framework and everything that was once here, because when the surrender was over with, they actually took the building down, dismantled it, and they moved it to turn it into a museum, and then had to rebuild it back on the spot where it was once located. Imagine you're a soldier after all those years of fighting, and you're standing out here at this location. Lee's just surrendered. Depending on what side you're on, this was worth it. If you're in the North and you're a part of the Union, this was all worth it, all the death and destruction, because you're the victor. You get to go home with your head held high. If you're in the South and you're part of the Confederacy, you're now questioning whether it was worth it at all, whether you even had a chance at winning, because you were fighting against such a big machine as the United States, really. You're fighting the United States. Over 600,000 dead, most of them from sickness, but 600,000 people would die because of this war. Now, this isn't the end of the war. This is just the end of the Army of Northern Virginia. The end of the war would come a little bit later on. There's still a lot of things left to do. But then, after this war is over with, comes the Reconstruction period. And that in itself turns into another civil war. April 14th, 1865, Robert E. Lee was making his way back from Appomattox. And he stops here at this location where I'm at right now and pitches his tent for the very last time. This would be the last bivouac of Robert E. Lee. Mr. Gilliam's property is out here, or was out here at the time. And he had been invited inside the house to stay for the night, but Robert E. Lee decided to decline the invitation and stayed in his tent here by the roadside. The next morning, he gets up and he takes off with Rooney Lee and John Lee, the son of Charles Carter Lee, Robert E. Lee's brother. And they make their way back to Richmond. And that was the last bivouac of Robert E. Lee right here in Virginia near the Civil War Trail site by roadside. I hope you enjoyed our video and our time out here on the road, checking out Appomattox and going to all the spots where the fights happened during the 160th anniversary of the surrender of Appomattox, the surrender of Army in Northern Virginia. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.